Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Metacast podcast. That's the podcast that improves itself, ourselves, and improves the self in general. My name is Ty, and I am going to be your host this week. And this is new for me. I am doing a solo episode. I've got no co-host, no guest. It's a new experience that I was a little bit nervous about going into this. And I think the only reason why I'm a little nervous, why it gave me any sort of anxiety, is actually because of this week's topic in itself. Which is, of course, you probably saw the thumbnail, you see the title. We're talking about perfectionism, and I've realized that this has been an issue for me for a long time, like a big part of my life. And I don't know if I made some of the mistakes that I've read about doing the research for this episode or not. It seems like I have, though. It seems that I'm kind of like a textbook example of perfectionism gone wrong. So let's dive right in with the topic at hand. So what is perfectionism from the beginning? What is the actual definition? So I do have here pulled up perfectionism defined. What is this from? I guess Psychology Today may have the best definition. Let's go with this. Psychology Today says that perfectionism is a trait that makes life an endless report card on accomplishments or looks. A fast and enduring track to unhappiness, is often accompanied by depression and eating disorders. Okay, that sounds less like a definition and more like a little more editorialized than I was hoping to go for. The definition that I'm seeing here, just like through a Google search, is refusal to accept any standard short of perfection. It does say in philosophy, a doctrine holding that religious, moral, social, or political perfection is attainable, especially the theory that human moral or spiritual perfection should be or has been attained. That's actually kind of interesting. I didn't know that there was an official, like, philosophical definition to perfectionism. But basically, I mean, we're talking about the mostly negative trait that I would say a lot of us experience. I do not think that it's uncommon. I think that a lot of people struggle with this. And I mean, the first thing that we need to ask is, so, like, what does it mean to be perfect? I know myself, I realize that it's not possible for everything to be perfect all the time. Perfectionism, like striving for perfect outcomes to things at all points in time, is not at all realistic. So, I mean, I think that's the main issue that we get to here, is that there's the problem that we run into is there's a big difference between what we experience in reality and the ideal that we have in our mind. That, to me, is the root of perfectionism, the root of the issues that stem from it. And I guess the question that it leads to is, why do we have these unrealistic expectations? How is it possible that our expectations of the world, of our outcomes to everything that we put out is so skewed and unrealistic such a large percentage of the time? I think that a lot of this comes from the I don't know what the proper term for it is, but in modern society, it's very common to experience only other people's successes. And I think that leads to an expectation that what you see that other people have, they got um, with a lot less effort than maybe they actually put in. I think that is the root to a lot of these unrealistic expectations. Another big part of perfectionism is a feeling that nothing is ever going to be good enough. Um, which is that's kind of a double edged sword for me because there's a good side to always striving for things to be better, right? Um, that is actually a very good thing. Wanting to improve, wanting to be the best person that you can be. I mean, that's kind of exactly what this podcast is about, right? So the the journey towards self improvement in itself is a good thing. I would say. I mean, I would say almost objectively good. However, that can be a slippery slope to always chasing perfection, to always chasing, wanting things to be better and better and better, and not knowing when something is just good enough. Now, of course, with perfection that we're speaking about here, with the perfectionism we're talking about, a lot of times it rears its head in regards to releasing work. If you've ever tried to do anything creative, or of course, I think we've all probably experienced it in school, working on a project, trying to get something done. It's it's so hard to find that line when you can finally consider something good enough to turn in or to release to the world, to publish, whatever you want to say about it. Um, it never seems good enough. There's always something else you can do. There's always more work you can put into it, and you can waste a lifetime on one project because of that. A lot of times it comes down to the little things that no one else would notice anyway. And that's something that I've really had to teach myself. An example of that came up for me recently was actually with my lighting. So I'm very picky when it comes to the lighting for my stream setup here. And there was, I forget how long it was. I think maybe it was maybe 3 to 4 weeks. Hey Michiru, what's up? You have not missed much. I just got started at 7:30, so you've missed probably the first like 8 minutes or so. Um, so we're talking about perfectionism, and I'm talking about a lot of times what trips us up is the little things that no one would notice anyways. And the example that I'm giving is so I have two background lights. They're the same lights. They light, they actually light me from the rear, which gives me the edge light on my shoulders here and kind of makes me stand out from the background. There were probably 3 weeks when I only had one of the lights and the other one wasn't here yet, and it bothered the hell out of me that one of my shoulders like had that edge light and the other one did not. And in reality, I don't know if I mean, it's not that I have a ton of viewers anyways, but I don't know if that occurred to anyone but me. I think that it's just the perfectionist in me that saw that and was bothered by that. It's these little things that stand out to us so much because we're that close to the project or whatever it is that we need to realize probably don't even matter to anyone else at large. But I think the most dangerous thing that perfectionism is it's an identity. It becomes a way to explain your personality in one word. It becomes, you get to say, but I'm a perfectionist. And I've done that. I know I've done that before, and I've used it as a way to excuse behavior, a way to excuse my conscious actions. I mean, basically, like what it does is it's a way to shift the blame from my conscious actions and put the blame on just a trait of my personality, just like as if it's something that I can't control. That it's just, oh well, it's in my nature. I'm a perfectionist, so that's just the way I am. And that's something that I really actively try to avoid in many different lanes of my life. And I don't know if I caught that it was happening in this lane until recently, actually. Um, Well, exactly. Yeah, Michiru, that is exactly what we were talking about. Is that there is like a tough line to find between holding yourself to high standards and perfectionism, right? Where high standards is a good thing. You want to. I mean, that's again like I brought it up a little bit ago, maybe before you got here, but that's kind of the whole point of this podcast. Is like it's about bettering yourself. If there's no idea or motivation to better yourself, um, what are you left doing, right? I mean, at the point in life where you when you don't think that you should work towards doing anything better, I think that's kind of when you stop living, right? So you always want to have higher standards for yourself. You always want to work towards something. But with that being said, you can't you can't let it stop you in the way that perfectionism has stopped a lot of people from getting things done. I mean myself, I'm speaking from personal experience. And that's what happens to me the most is the biggest problem with perfectionism, which I guess is like the next section I wanted to get in here. Um it prevents you from finishing things. You procrastinate. It leads to procrastination, and it leads to a feeling that it's never going to be good enough and it's not worth releasing. And especially from the side of like trying to create content, nothing's ever done. You're always trying to put more work into something, and that's not good. You're never going to get better doing that. I mean, so with that being said, I did learn in the preparation for this episode that perfectionism, I guess, is not always negative. Apparently there are two different branches of perfectionism, I guess, that is referred to. There's adaptive and maladaptive. So adaptive perfectionism can actually be um almost what we're talking about, when someone is motivated by the constant effort to better something and to hold it to a high standard. That actually can be considered adaptive perfectionism, and it can be a good thing. Maladaptive is what we're normally referring to. It's when the perfectionism is founded in unrealistic expectations and becomes a hindrance. I mean, which is why, I mean, when we're talking about perfectionism here, it is almost exclusively a negative thing. Even though, like I'm suggesting, there is a positive side to it that exists. When we're just using the term perfectionism in this context, we are talking about maladaptive perfectionism. So the problems that it causes, the biggest one, and I know that I experienced this, is tasks can seem just simply overwhelming. You have that struggle of like, where do I start? It's tough to break the large project or the large task down into its component pieces and figure out what you need to do to actually get it done. Because you want everything to be perfect. You want even step 1 to be perfect. And that's the main issue, is that I don't think there is such thing as a perfect step 1. You need to just get started. There needs to be a step 1, and that can lead to progress, or it will lead to progress. Sorry, it's not that it can. It will lead to progress. Um but wanting that first step to be perfect is going to hold you back, and it is only a negative thing. Sitting in and trying to plan and worrying about the perfect way to begin is not going to lead to progress. Hey Pikachu, what's up? We are talking about perfectionism, and distance is actually, yeah, I didn't even notice. I didn't mention in the intro. I mentioned that he wasn't here and that I was doing this episode alone, but I didn't mention why. He's having to travel for work this week. So he is actually out of town right now. I don't know exactly where he is. I know we talked about it, but off the top of my head, I can't remember. But yeah, so he should be back, if I remember correctly. He will be back for next week's episode. But yeah, this week he is traveling. Um, okay, so back to the problems that are caused from perfectionism. The tasks seeming overwhelming is a big one that I know that I've experienced too. And then the second one, another thing that I know I've struggled with, is that you never finish anything, you never publish. Projects just go undone. You work on a piece for what can seem like forever, and you never do anything with it, because you never deemed it to be worthy of releasing, basically. This I've experienced this so much, with music that I've tried to make, with gaming content, and that I mean, honestly, that's one of the main reasons I enjoy what I'm doing now. Streaming is a little bit different in regards that all I have to do is like I press the go live button and the content is out there. It's not like a video that I'm recording that then I have to edit and get to a spot that it's okay to release, because I know myself. I know the perfectionism would start to eat in there, and there would be the struggle of like, okay, how much editing time do I put on this? How, it becomes it becomes a problem for me, which is why I like doing this. I feel like it makes me put content out. All I do is I hit the go live button and it's out there. It's uncomfortable, but there's a big benefit in doing things that make you uncomfortable. So that is one thing that I've realized that I really do enjoy about this the whole streaming thing, is it makes this second problem of perfectionism kind of a non-issue for me. I don't have to worry about finishing something to publish it because it's published the moment I create it. Before I move on to the third problem that comes up, I want to address what Michiru said in chat. Yeah, I agree. When I've heard of perfectionist, it's usually in some type not so great reference. Yeah, exactly. It can also be pivotal in some people's growth in life. In my opinion, I wish I was more of a perfectionist. Well, that's interesting the way you worded that. How you said in your opinion you wish you were more of a perfectionist. Because I mean, like we said, like the term perfectionist kind of almost has negative baggage already with it. It means that you're holding yourself to unrealistic standards. I would argue to be more correct to say like I just you wish you held yourself to higher standards or whatever, not that you wish you were more of a perfectionist. Because by the definition we're using, like if you were more of a perfectionist, it would be to the extreme that it's getting in your way rather than it just being improving yourself. But I think I get it. I understand what you're getting at there. You could do so much better at things if you just held yourself to a higher standard. Exactly. Yeah. So that's like what we're talking about, is there is something very good about holding yourself and others to a high standard, but there is a slippery slope to that becoming perfectionism and in holding yourself to then unrealistic standards. And I think that that's the trickiest part of all this, is where do you find that balance? Where do you find where the standards become unrealistic? And that's something like I hope we get into a little later, but it's tough, right? Okay, so getting back to the problems caused by perfectionism, the third that I've had pointed out here is you honestly just become slower to learn and to adapt with everything you do. Because mistakes are one of the best teaching tools. If you work as a perfectionist, you don't make as many mistakes, and therefore you learn less. You spend too long, like we were just talking about, trying to plan that perfect first step, that your planning stage, because you're scared of making a mistake, that planning stage becomes the amount of time you spend planning cuts into the time that you could just spend doing the actual activity and getting better at it. The actual way to learn is performing the activity, making mistakes, and learning from those mistakes. Instead, a perfectionist is going to fear that mistake, fear the rejection or the humiliation or whatever would come from being so audacious that you could make a mistake. And because of that, they're going to spend less time actually performing the whatever the activity is. It's also so true. I've learned anything I know in life through mistakes I've made. Exactly. Yeah. That is, I mean, the largest teacher in our lives are the mistakes that we make. So the final problem that I've identified here is that it being a perfectionist leads to and I would argue is the cause of so much anxiety in your life. You are trying so hard to live up to these unrealistic standards that you have imposed on yourself, no one else has, that it causes it creates a very anxious environment. And the worst part is it's almost entirely self-imposed. I would argue that it 100% entirely self-imposed. So that's what anxiety. That's what perfection is, and that's what it does to us. The next question is, sorry, why do we do it? Because it is something that we are participating in, right? It's not as much as we want to feel like it is just something we were born into, or it is a state that we are, or it is our identity. It's not. It's something that we do, and it's something that we can choose not to do. It may not be easy. It may take work and it may take effort, but it is something that we are performing. So, um, so why do we do it? Why is this part of us? Our unrealistic expectations come from the fact that we started to touch on this earlier. We don't see all of the work that goes in to not only what other people have, what other people are, accomplishments, things like that. You just see the result. You don't actually see how difficult it was for that person to accomplish something or to earn something. And I think that it leads us to believe that so many things that we see others with, things that they have that we don't, or things that we want, I think that it leads us to believe that they're not earned, basically. That it was easy for someone to end up with something. And I don't think that's true. I think that we only see our own struggles, right? When we're trying to do something difficult, we experience that day-to-day struggle minute by minute. And we know how long a minute can feel when you're doing something that you don't want to be doing. And we know how many of those minutes it takes to actually accomplish something that you want to do. We feel that struggle, but we don't feel when other people go through that struggle. We just see, the Instagram post at the end of the struggle that shows what they accomplished. And even when that person tries to make us aware of the struggle they went through, they may be like, what are they called, like influencers or motivators that, that are very open with the daily struggle and how difficult things are. Even when they try to convey that to us, it doesn't come across that way, right? When you picture someone else's struggle, isn't it just like a montage in like a 90s action movie, right? You see their struggle as like a few brief moments, a few flashes of them working to make that final product, whatever it was. But you don't actually see that day to day, what you experience within yourself. And it makes it seem like so much easier. Whatever it is they have that you want, it makes it seem like they didn't have to work as hard as you would have to for it. That it was so much easier for them. And yeah, we're so painfully aware of our own struggles, and we're so blissfully unaware of the struggles of others. And I think that's a main reason why our expectations are unrealistic, and that's a main reason why we become perfectionists. Is we start holding ourselves to a standards that it seems like, oh well, this person reached this accomplishment with little to no effort, we should be able to do the same. And when we fall short of that because it's unrealistic, we question if we're good enough, or it leads to any other. It leads to the anxiety that I started to talk about earlier. It has any number of negative emotions that stem from it. Another reason why we do this is, I think, the selection bias that we see. So not only do we excuse me, not only do we not see the effort that goes into other successes, we're only shown the successes, right? We don't see the fact that a large percentage of people don't accomplish these things that are great. We're kind of expecting everyone to be great, right? And that's the thing about greatness, is when everyone's great, no one's great. But we live in we live in a society. We live in a society now that it seems like everyone is expecting greatness from themselves and from everyone, and that's just not. That's another unrealistic expectation that I think is slightly different. But it's the selection bias that we're only shown these successes. We don't see, let's go back to like the Instagram example, like I was bringing up. We don't see Instagram accounts of people that tried and failed 1,000 times at things. That's so true. I've had realizations in many things where I realized the real scale of what I'm trying to accomplish. It's either way higher or lower than what I thought. Yeah, exactly. It's so hard to try to make a guess, and we're always so far off, right? I'm watching too many streams. I boosted into perfectionism by getting good, like at a certain level of my music playing, or yeah, exactly. Well, see, that's one of the areas where I've experienced perfectionism, is like with writing music, where you've got an idea for a song and you start working on that idea, you start developing that idea, eventually it becomes a full song. There's never a point where it's done, right? Like as a musician, you've done this where you constantly tweak little things, like, okay, well, let's change, bar 4 of this. We're actually, we're going to do something a little different, and you constantly change the song over and over and over. Like, it's never actually done. And that's the perfectionist attitude in me. I'm hoping you've experienced that same thing, Pikachu. Like, you're bringing up the music. Maybe think about that again. Vicious triangle: perfectionism, anxiety, depression. How do you break it? Does it need to be broken? Well, yeah, I would argue that of course it needs to be broken. It sounds like it's. I mean, all 3 points on it are negative right there. So yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be broken. And how do we break it? We will hopefully be getting into that later. We reworked the hell out of songs in my old band, but then after releasing them, still not exactly that. And I mean, you can see that with other like bigger musicians when they release a album version of the song that you get to know and love, and then when they play it live 10 years later, they do things just slightly differently, because that over the past decade of them playing it, they've realized like, oh, maybe I would change this tiny little part. Yeah, I think that's in all of us, but it's 2 degrees, right? I mean, like what we talked about earlier with the adaptive and the maladaptive perfectionism. I don't think it's a binary thing. I don't think that if you have perfectionism, or if you have traits of perfectionism, that it's only going to be in category A or category B. I think that it's a spectrum that you're gonna have both adaptive and maladaptive traits to the perfectionism that you exhibit. Um, Yeah, it's the main obstacle in everyone's life that needs to be broken. Yeah, Michiru, I completely agree with that too. I didn't really realize until getting the stuff together for this episode how much anxiety, depression, and perfectionism play into each other. So like we started to talk about there, we know that having high standards is good. There's another reason why I think why we do this, why we end up being perfectionists. Because we know that having high standards is good, and we know that pushing ourselves to be better is good, it leads to that slippery slope to perfectionism. It's almost like the goal to better yourself kind of, when taken to the extreme, leads this way, right? All right. So the biggest, I don't want to say the biggest question. Another big question that I have is where does it come from? Not only why do we do it, but where does it come from? I think one of the roots, one of the actual stems is the fear of rejection, because it seems like the best aspect of perfectionism is that you avoid failure, you avoid making mistakes, and you avoid rejection. It's so like when I draw like a map, it's like perfectionism leads to procrastination, it leads to anxiety, it leads to depression. Um, but what leads to the perfectionism? And the one that I could find, the road there is the fear of rejection. I think that this may be a root. This may be how we end up with perfectionism. Yeah, exactly. It stems from our own insecurities. Another thing that I've realized with myself too. This may be, I mean, it may be more personal. I don't know how common this is, but for me, it's the permanence of things that scares me. And this is what I started to touch on with earlier, talking about why I really enjoy like streaming as a medium. When I am just talking to someone, having a conversation face to face, or or on some audio based like Discord, right? I can talk to them, and it's not that difficult for me. I mean, of course, like I still have my, my little bits of social anxiety and stuff like that, but I don't struggle over every word being perfect. I don't worry about that. That's not something that really crossed my mind. It's just I'm able to just have a conversation with them, and I'm able to say what I need to say to communicate. When it comes to then recording something like this, like knowing that this is going to be recorded and released as an episode of my podcast, that becomes a permanent thing in my mind, and it becomes way more anxiety inducing. I don't know why. I think, I mean, I don't know if it's really fear of rejection here, or if it's just like the permanence of it, the fact that it will now exist. It's not just a conversation that I'm having with this person that, the sounds I'm making with my mouth are literally just vibrations in the air that will dissipate, and it will be nothing very soon. The fact that this will now exist as ones and zeros on a server somewhere that people can pull back up and watch or listen to, it means that I need to get my fucking words right. I need to word things correctly. I need it to be as perfect as possible. I don't know why I have that tendency. And that's why I like streaming like this. I like that I don't have the option to sit back and rewrite this and re-record it. If I was just recording right now, there's a very good chance that I would finish this episode, quote unquote. I would finish, quote unquote. I would listen to it and realize, oh, I should have said this. I should have done this differently. I should have changed this. And I would go back and try to re-record it, versus just streaming it live, just following the mentality and putting it out there. And that I think that that's just so much better. And it helps me, it forces me to deal with the permanence, and not worry about the rewriting thing. And that's something I don't know why that's always played. It's been like a problem with like in school, having to write papers. If I could just sit and talk to someone, I can explain the idea of the paper so easily. But once I'm actually having to put it to words on a page that will exist as a hard copy, then the perfectionism starts eating at me. It's so weak, but it does. And I'm realizing through the effort of putting this episode together that it's something that I need to change, and getting into right now. How do we stop it? What are the ways that we change this? Okay, before I start this, I'm gonna catch back up with chat. Perfectionism stems from the rewards. If you strive to create something perfect because it is perfect, it will appeal to, quote unquote, everyone, and the rewards can be, well, exactly, yes. You want something to be, you want success, right? Which, I mean, of course, like we talked about, having high standards and wanting the best for yourself is not at all a bad thing. However, All right, so like we're going to get into right now, how do we stop it? The first thing you need to do is accept that you are not perfect and no one else is either. It's hard. Like it sounds so simple and it sounds obvious. Like of course you know you're not perfect. Of course I know I'm not perfect. I know that. I'm a human. Humans are flawed. I know that. The rational part of me knows that. However, that doesn't stop me from holding myself to unrealistic, if not perfect, standards. And it's hard to realize that in today's perfect world. Like we were talking about earlier with like social media and things, we see the life that someone wants to show us, right? We see the cherry-picked moments, the best moments. Excuse me, geez, I got the hiccups. We see the cherry-picked best moments of someone's life on display. And we get the impression that it is perfect. And then we compare the displayed version of someone else's life to the real version of ours, and we're disappointed, of course. We need to realize that what we see is not real. A lot of the times, what we see is not the reality. And we can't hold ourselves to standards that we'll never be able to reach. We need to embrace the mistakes. This is how we learn. This is where growth comes from. One of the things that has helped me is putting the process of working on display like this. Rather than sitting and recording this episode alone, where I could be in my room with no one watching and trying to get things right. You put the actual process on display. You record it in front of people. We'll do it live. You do it live. If you can handle that. I know that there's a Stephen King quote that is what is it? It's write with the door shut and then rewrite with the door open, basically. So I mean, there are great minds that would say that it is okay to have the creative process be in solitude. I know for myself though that it makes it a lot more likely that I'm actually going to release something if I'm working, if the actual process is on display like this. I know that there's like it's uncomfortable for me, but I know that things that are uncomfortable are good. There is something incredibly comfortable to me when I can perform the process alone. I love that about my job right now, where I work basically alone. Whenever I get a task, I go back to my cubicle by myself and I can, put my nose down and work on the task. I don't have to work in a group where my process is on display. And I don't know where that comes from. There's almost like a shame to my work process, and I don't understand why. It's like I need there to be this mystery to it, that someone gives me a task, I walk away, I go to, I go behind the curtain, and then I come back with the finished product, rather than I'm actually seeing, like being able to look over my shoulder and watch what I'm doing to get to that. I don't know why. I don't know. Do I think that that it's going to come across to them as better or more impressive if they can't see it? I don't know. That's something I really need to look into for myself. But I do know that the more the process is on display, the more likely I am to release it with things like this, with like YouTube videos, the podcast in itself. I want to catch back up on chat here for a second. Let's see. It helps if you can start to see the big picture. Trying to not get bogged down in the details. Ask yourself, does it really matter? What's the worst that can happen? Can you survive it? Will it really matter tomorrow, next week, next year, etc.? Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that is the Big Dog 79. That is a great point. Not letting yourself get bogged down in the details is a big part of this. I don't know, some of the questions that you've got there, like if you keep asking yourself those, depending on how anxious of a person you are, you may end up, driving yourself a little crazy. But I do think that is a very good point. More often than not, it is little details that you're letting yourself getting bogged down into. Um, you have to stop thinking or stop trying to think about perfectionism as a goal, like trying to say cool people. Sorry, hold on 1 second. You have to stop trying to think about perfectionism as a goal. Like they say, cool people don't point out when they do something cool. You just have to live your life, take in all your own moments, and accept those moments as perfect. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying there. You kind of like, okay, you have to like let it happen. Yes. I agree with that. I completely agree, Pikachu. Yeah. In first grade, they told me that practice makes perfect, but in third grade, they told me nobody's perfect, so I quit practicing. That's a good quote. I like that. Stephen Wright. That's funny. So what I think is the best way to get past this, one of the best things you can do, is setting actual deadlines. And this is something that that I do, like even with this podcast, right? It every week I have to record an episode at 7:30. I hold myself to that. Even weeks like this when I don't have a co-host and don't have a guest, and I make myself just do it solo. I hold myself to that deadline. And because I've only got that week, there's only 7 days that I can do the research and put together what I want to. And unfortunately, it means like Pikachu, dude, I want to have you on as a guest. Please, if you're a member of the Discord, we need to get together. And yeah, let's have you on an upcoming week. I would love that. But because I set that actual deadline and I know that on Wednesday evening, I'm going to have to record this, I can't spend as long as I want to preparing and doing as much research as I would want to. I make myself just say, "Oh, well, time's up. We're going to do this." It is unfortunate. It means that, I mean, like with today, I have to do an episode that I'm not ready to do technically. Like I shouldn't say technically, that I don't feel like I'm ready to do. But I think that feeling is my perfectionism. I think that's what it is that I'm trying to overcome. That part of me that says, no, we need to research this for another week. We need to cover these other points. We need to find a way to make this episode flow better. Things like that. Like, I don't let myself do that. That's what this podcast is all about. That's the reason this podcast exists. Was in the beginning, my friend Distance and I, we talked about the fact that we wanted to create a podcast together. And we started kicking around a large number of ideas for what the theme or the topic of our podcast could be. And we had no idea what we wanted to do. I realized that the perfectionist in me was never going to get started at that point. That I would look at all of the opportunities that we had, all of the ideas that we came up with, and I would never actually choose one and start. So we came up with the idea of doing a podcast about figuring out what our podcast will be about. That's why, like, I mean, that's the whole reason for the name, the Metacast. It's the podcast about the podcast. It made us just do it. That's the whole, like, do it live mentality. It's the whole reason for this was trying to step around my perfectionism and trying to just say, like, we can't wait for that perfect first step that doesn't exist. We're just going to get started. And eventually, by doing this, we will find what we actually want to do. I wasn't able to just sit around and wait for the perfect topic for a podcast if I'm already releasing episodes. And I think that's the whole point, is to make yourself just do things. We need a more realistic expectation of what it takes to succeed. And I think that we need to give that expectation to ourselves. You just do it. You do the thing that you want to do. You realize that your first attempt is not going to be perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect first attempt. You just do it. And in doing it, you you do it, you do it, you do it, you do it. You keep doing it. And maybe one day you end up producing something that appears to others who are blissfully unaware of your struggle that what you just came up with was an overnight success. That's the whole goal. But you only got there. You only got the product that they then see as perfection and triggers their perfectionism. You only got there by failing and making those mistakes over and over again and being okay with doing something that wasn't perfect to learn, to eventually get to the point where you did have something that was seen as perfect by someone else. We need to stop having unrealistic expectations for ourselves or others. We need to realize that perfection in certain situations is possible, but that comes from many, many, many attempts. There is no such thing as the perfect first step. You just have to get out there, you have to fail, you have to make mistakes, and you have to learn from what you're doing. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Metacast podcast. If you guys are watching this on YouTube and you've enjoyed the conversation, why don't you hit that like button, subscribe to keep up to date with what we're doing, and comment below and let us know your opinions on and experience with perfectionism. Is it something that you've struggled with in the past? Is it something that you know someone that struggles with? I'd be interested in hearing your experience. If you're interested in further taking part in the conversation or even joining us as a guest on a future episode, join my Discord. The link is in the description down below. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode live Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on twitch.tv/TylerTV. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope you all have a great week.